Alrighty, y'all. We'll do a short introduction. I'm Ranger Kate. This is Ranger Beth. And this is Uncle Mike. This is Uncle Mike's Outdoor Kitchen.
The first Dutch oven cooking experience I had was actually my dad had purchased this big, huge black pot. And he took this big pot and he would stick it at the campfire and he'd use it as a big skillet. And he'd mix up potatoes and eggs and bacon and things. Or he'd make stew in it, and that was it. And nothing else beyond that. That was good, but nothing beyond that. I learned a little bit, like how to make a meatloaf in it, and how to make dinner rolls or crescent rolls, or how to make little smokies wrapped up in crescent rolls, pig in a blanket. And so, fast forward from me being younger than Boy Scout age to son about to go into Boy Scouts, and we went on a father-son camping trip. We're in our camp area, looking at the other dads and sons in their little camp areas, and I'm seeing these people burning their fingers as they're pulling packets of aluminum foil out of the fire, opening up their foil packets, having their raw vegetables and burnt on the outside, raw on the inside meat products that they had mixed in there from their pocket stews they were making. You would hear language that you weren't supposed to hear at father-son events, but literally we had meatloaf and crescent rolls that day. The thing that I've learned is that there's nothing that you can cook at home that you can't cook out in the woods. Absolutely nothing that you want to cook out of the campsite that you cannot cook, as long as you have some basic techniques in mind. And so there's some basic tools and accessories that are necessary to be able to be effective in your Dutch oven cooking, but you don't have to have a ton of gear. One thing you need to do is realize you're going to be working with hot coals and really hot iron, and you really want to keep your fingers from burning off to a crisp. And so it's a good idea to get a good pair of gloves. These are Lodge brand gloves. They're about $20 a pair. You can spend that amount of money on a heavy leather set of gloves if you want to. When they're not looking like that, they look like this. I would say brand new, but I actually let somebody borrow them. That's how they look to start. Most of my cooking is done with charcoal. I'll also use wood coal straight out of the campfire, but most of it's done with charcoal because it's so simple. Charcoal does a couple of things for you. It's portable, you can grab it anywhere and light it up anywhere, and it gives a fairly consistent heat source. When I say fairly consistent, because it varies between the brands and types of charcoal. I like to use Kingsford Original. The red, white, and blue bags, mostly white and blue with some red on it, have a consistent burn rate that I know that if I put those coals into one of my charcoal chimneys that I'll tell you about in just a second to start them with, get them lit properly, put them with my Dutch oven, that I've got at least a good 45 to 50 minutes of cooking time with that one batch of coals. And that's not the same if I used a different brand. I've had some that's been given to me by well-meaning friends that just didn't work near as well as the Kingsford did. It wasn't consistent. But the charcoal is what I'll use most frequently. I'll also sometimes use wood coal straight out of the fire. When I do it, it's nice to have some kind of a shovel to scoop them with. When you're working with hot coals, not only are gloves a good idea, but it makes sense to have something with which you can pick them up and move them around and arrange them. And so I've got some tongs that are dedicated to that purpose. If all I had to cook with were my gloves and my tongs and my Dutch oven, I'd really have everything that I need. Do y'all ever use a charcoal chimney? The first time I saw one of these, I had no idea what it was. I actually worked in a retail business and in a part of it that didn't do lawn and garden. And the lawn and garden guy was closing out a bunch of stuff, and he marked down some charcoal chimneys. I asked what they were. He told me what they were, so I bought 2 of them, and that was back in 1981. I have not bought lighter fluid since then. A piece or 2 of newspaper crumpled up, put underneath, dump your charcoal in the top. There's a grate in the bottom of it that separates the top from the bottom. Light the paper. The chimney is going to draw the fire up through it, and it's going to light your charcoal completely. And so there's no lighter fluid you have to deal with, and there's no fuss to that. But the charcoal chimney will give you a real easy light, and you can pick up your charcoal, take it to where you want it, dump it out, arrange it as you want, and it's a whole lot easier managing your coals I said everything I needed was the gloves and the tongs, and that's true. But the next thing that's nice to have is something with which to lift the lids off the Dutch ovens. Now, that may be where Mr. Fingertip went to its final rest, from reaching down too many times to grab a lid. Even though these are leather and they're very good at keeping the heat away, heat will go through, so you're not going to want to hold it very long. There are various types of devices that can be used to lift the lids off of your ovens, and they are creatively referred to as lid lifters. And it can be something as simple as this piece of metal that's been bent around that just simply hooks underneath the lip of the lid, and you lift it up. The problem with something as simple as that is you could end up with ashes and coals in places you don't want, because it's just nothing but a piece of wire. The next step up is something like one of these two that are less than $10 in most sporting goods stores, Tractor Supplies, Walmarts, those kinds of places. The bar on them helps give some stability. So when I lift this one, it rocks a little bit, but not near as much. This one has the extra little grip here that I can get a lot more support off of it and keep it more stable. The main thing is you want to be able to take your lid off without dumping ashes into your food. Now, most of us, y'all may be different than me, but most of us prefer not to have dirt and grass clippings in our food. If you do, that's okay. But if you don't, it's a good idea once you've lifted that lid to know, where am I going to put it? Am I going to set it on the ground? Anything you set it on, it's going to stick to the bottom of that. So it's nice to have some sort of a stand that you can put your lid on. It can be something as simple as one of these fold up, put away stands that, I believe these are made by Lodge, that also work great as a place to set your oven lid. The main thing is you don't want it to go on the ground. So if I don't have a lid lifter, but I've got the gloves and I've got a pot stand, I can also use my pot stand to lift it with. The only problem is, where am I going to set it unless I've got another pot stand? So just some options there to consider. You don't have to have anything, as I've already told you, fancy to cook on. But some folks like to have their backs last longer. And I'm at the point where I'm happy not to have to stoop more than I really need to. So it's nice to have a cooking surface that is at a level that you can get to without having to bend over a whole lot. And so this particular table is one that's made by Lodge. It comes with this windscreen that will help with your coal management and your heat management a couple of ways. First off, it will keep the wind from blowing through and reducing the temperature with which you have to cook if it's a cold day. Or it will keep, also that same wind, it will keep from burning up your coals more quickly. You get a lot of heat, a lot of coals that are going, and you put a lot of wind to it, they're going to disappear much more quickly. So these windscreens are very handy to have. The nice thing about the tables is they're something apart and away from your campfire. So you can have your heat source in one place and your cook table a little bit further away and not have heat stroke quite as quickly. So that's an important factor. Lodge makes this table. The legs fold. The bottom legs have a little adjustments that you can level it, and it's really kind of snazzy. Camp Chef also makes a very good table. Their windscreen only comes up to about that height. Still very effective. It doesn't have folding legs. It has legs that you actually screw in, and it is solid as a truck. I could stand on top of it along with a couple of Dutch ovens. It's not going anywhere. And so we have a couple of Camp Chef tables. We just didn't load them all up with us today to show off everything. But something to keep off the ground is nice to be able to do. Also, you can cook in a place like this right here. With a table like this, I can have my charcoal chimney on one side, get my coals going, and cook my food in my pot right here, and not worry about scorching the grass, catching the place on fire, neither of which we really want to do out here. So I feel a little bit like the old Let's Make a Deal show, and say behind door number 3 there's one other option that I like to use. And this little stand is nothing more than a painter's work stand. It's aluminum, it folds up, it's super lightweight. The only problem with something like this, you may not be able to see it from there, it has slats where number 1 make it lighter, but number 2, stuff can fall through. So you may not want to put your coals there. So what I use for my coals are these fancy pans. Now some folks will look at that and say, well, that's an oil changing pan. This is a hog feed pan, and it's $6. And so you can put that on the table. You can put your coals in there, put your pot inside there, just like I've done over here. And you have your fire contained, and you've done it with substantially less money, and it's a lot lighter weight. The other thing that I like about these particular pans for my coals is when I'm finished cooking, I can put all the coals in one, put the other one on top, and then I'll put some kind of weight on it that will help hold it in place, and it will suffocate those coals. So the first recipe that I really like has a really awful picture, so that's why it's tucked back here where it's not so noticeable. And it's already, somebody's already asked, is that a pot of hot dogs? And it's the worst picture I've ever taken of carrots. But this is nothing more than just sliced up carrots, a bunch of basil, throw it in the Dutch oven, put some coals under it, some coals over it. In about 45 minutes, they are melt in your mouth, almost candy, delicious, delicious veggies. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of the pan, not so much because it needs it, but just because I do it out of habit. And so that's not a bad thing to do. It doesn't hurt anything. But that process, this heavy lid will seal the oven. And because of that, you get a pressure cook steamer effect, and there's enough moisture in those carrots to create a steaming as well. So I'll put the carrots and the basil in there. About 20 or 30 minutes, I may give it a stir, put the lid back on. The next time I open the lid, it's time to eat. But the second recipe that I'll tell you about is a favorite of our families. And I always take too long to tell the story, but you're out here, so it's so tough. I have 2 kids. My wife and I have a boy and a girl. And growing up, neither of them wanted to eat vegetables. And they were just wired that you eat meat. And we said, you've got to be getting some vegetables into your system. And so you each have to pick a vegetable that you will eat. And our daughter Michelle picked broccoli. And her logic behind that is you can put enough cheese on that broccoli to cover it up completely, and it's really good stuff. And so broccoli would be her vegetable. Well, the catch is, if it was broccoli day, everybody at the table had to eat broccoli. Her older brother Chris wasn't a fan of broccoli, but he had to eat it. He knew that she hated Brussels sprouts. And so he decided Brussels sprouts are going to be his go-to vegetable. Well, this picture shows the way that I fix Brussels sprouts. And it's a very complicated recipe. It takes Brussels sprouts and salt and pepper. And if you're vegan, it takes olive oil. If you're not, it takes bacon. And so the way I like to do it is I'll take a package of bacon, chop it up, put it into the Dutch oven, put nothing but bottom heat underneath. So now I'm treating this thing just like a skillet, as a fryer would be. Stir that bacon up so it's starting to get crisp. Don't dump any of the grease out. Dump in a couple of pounds of Brussels sprouts, stir them all around so they've all got a little bit of a nice shine to them. A little kosher salt, because I like to stick my fingers in and pinch it, and that's easier to grab than table salt. Some fresh ground pepper, because that's what they do on TV shows and it looks cool. And stir that in, and then put the lid on it, heat underneath. At that point, I take most of the heat that was underneath and take that off. Put about half of the heat on top, half of the heat on the bottom. About 20 or 30 minutes in, I'll give it a stir, another 20 or 30 minutes, and it's melt in your mouth Brussels sprout candy. And it's just really, really good. So that's the Brussels sprout recipe. So biscuits are basically flour, baking powder, salt, some sort of shortening, and some sort of liquid. If you happen to have heavy whipping cream and self-rising flour, you now have 2 ingredients to make a 2-ingredient biscuit. But equal parts by weight of self-rising flour and heavy cream. Mix that together. Don't overmix it. You'll get your dough, pat it down, cut out your biscuits, and you're ready to go. Self-rising flour is flour that already has baking powder and salt in it. If you take heavy whipping cream to put it in a food processor and whip it up, and that whipped cream's going to whip up really nice and fluffy, and you keep whipping it, and eventually it's going to start to lump up and break down that cream and broken the butter from the liquid. If you take all of that solid part, squeeze it in cheesecloth, and you have made butter. And the rest leftover that you've got, the liquid that was heavy cream, is now buttermilk. Really, when you're using that heavy cream, you've already got your liquid and your shortening. So it's a real simple way to do it. I used to take careful time cutting out round biscuits because they look pretty and that's how they're supposed to be. And then I realized that most of my biscuit eating is either under gravy, or I'm shoving a sausage in it, or I'm putting honey on it, and it's so quick that I don't care what it looks like. I stopped doing that. Now what I do is I just pat it out, and then I cut them. I just cut them in squares. And so if you come up in a little bit, you'll see some biscuits that really are weird shaped. I don't care. They taste great. And so what I've got here is a very simple recipe that I've got the recipe and the instructions in the same picture, because I've got a Dutch oven lined in parchment paper because it's going to be sticky, and I've got a couple of cans of pie filling, and they're upside down because I'm dumping them in, and I've got a cake mix also upside down because I'm dumping it in. And this particular recipe that we made, we used Sprite as the liquid. You can also take a stick of butter and slice that up and put that over the top of the cake, and that will work well. And what we ended up with is this chocolate cherry deliciousness that is really, really good. So I love that. The parchment paper allowed us, when we were done, just to pull everything out. There's still some moisture that'll get through, so there's still a wiping out to do. Not near the problem with cleaning it up. Okay. So first off, let me just talk about seasoning a little bit. Seasoning is the process of taking the metal pan that you have, in this case a cast iron skillet or a Dutch oven, and you get it completely clean, completely dry, and then you coat it with a light coating of oil, and then you put it in the oven or some sort of a heat source, and then you begin to heat it up. And the next thing you need to do is you get it to about 300 degrees, take it out of that oven, wipe out every bit of oil that you can, and then you put it back in the oven and you kick that temperature up. If I'm doing it with a vegetable oil or Crisco or something, up to about 450 degrees. It's a great way to test your smoke alarms, because what you're doing is you're heating that oil to the point that you are making a chemical change occur. It's changing from oil to a carbon-based polymer. And the only thing that's left once you're done is that carbon polymer that is now adhered to that cast iron. All the liquid part of it's completely gone. A couple of seasonings that way, a couple of coats of that, and you've got a very well-seasoned pan. All of my Dutch ovens are done that way. But really, that's all seasoning is. Getting oil past the smoke point for a long enough time where it will change its chemical structure to a polymer that adheres to the pan. So how do you clean it? There are people that get their feathers ruffled and get really scared and nervous if some people use the S word. But I'm going to use it. Sometimes people will use soap in their cast iron, and they'll wash their pans out with soap. If that's what you like to do, do it. It doesn't hurt anything. Well, my pan's going to taste like soap. Not if you rinse it out. Well, it's going to ruin my seasoning. No, it's not, because what does soap do? It breaks down oils. You don't have any oil. You've cooked the oil off. You've got a polymer that's adhered to your pan. Soap used to be heavily lye-based. And when it was heavily lye-based, that lye would eat through anything that was organic, including that seasoning. And yeah, lye will take everything off of your metal. But the modern kitchen soaps that we have now aren't going to hurt it. That said, I don't use soap. But not because I'm afraid to, but just because I don't need to. So if I'm out camping, and I'm not using a liner, I'll get all the food out of it. I'll get some water, rinse it out, get it completely devoid of particles of stuff, and then heat it up till it has well exceeded that level of sanitation, and we're good to go. So one of the beauties about a Dutch oven is you can cook with it as a roasting pan. You can cook with it as something to bake. You can put oil in it and fry. You can take the lid, just as we were just reminded, and invert it, set it on a stand with coals underneath it, and now you have a skillet, or more of a griddle. And that will work. It's a little bit concave, and depending on your stand that you're using, it may have a little bit of a wobble depending how you do it, but that will give you another smooth cooking surface. That's a great transition into one of my favorite fun things is we like to make pizza. And lots of times we've done pizza out in the campground. Pizza requires a really high heat. A pizza oven is going to be 500 degrees or more. So it requires a really high heat. And so the distance from the top of an oven to the bottom of the oven is typically about 4 inches-ish. That's a technical measurement. And the more heat you put on top, the more like a pizza oven you will have. Well, you can bake a pizza in your Dutch oven. Absolutely fine. Some people will take their Dutch oven and put their pizza crust on the lid and set the bottom on top, cover it with coals to get the process that they want going, as far as heat going, and that creates their pizza oven. When they're done, they simply lift it off. That's another place that my gloves got some of that burnt off end to it. Several years ago, my son found on the internet a cooking supply place where a guy took flat pieces of metal, bent it into a loop, welded it together, and sold it as a pizza ring. And we bought one, and we've loved it. And I wanted to buy another one, and I couldn't get the folks at that particular website to respond after multiple times. I have a friend of mine who has a machine shop who basically can build anything. One of his side lines of customers is a Model T club that he can make parts for any Model T that no longer parts exist for. He also has some of the things that he's made literally up in space because of NASA needed something made to a certain specification. Well, he made some pizza rings for me. And the way this pizza ring works is I have now shortened the height between my bottom and my top. And I just completely cover this with coals, and I've got a bunch of coals underneath. If I've got 2 lids, that works. If there are 2 lids the same size, it works even better because this doesn't slide around. But that does the job for me. And your oven at home is very rarely at the temperature that it says it is. It will heat up, if you want it 350 degrees, it'll heat up to 370 to 80 and then drop down to 320. That range will go up and down and average about that 350. Yours may be better than mine, and that up and down may be closer, but it's still going to be above and below that 350. So what I'll do is I'll follow a method that's called the Dinwiddie ring. And in essence, what you do, and I don't know if you can see that from back there or not, what you do is you take your coals and you make a ring around the lid of the pan. How many coals do you use? Enough to make a ring around the lid of your pan. And then you make a similar ring around the perimeter of the base. How many do you use? Enough to make a ring. And so what that means is on a 12-inch pan, I'm going to use a certain number of coals. If I'm using my 14, or I've got some pots that are much bigger than that, which normal humans shouldn't have, I still don't need to count coals. If I'm using a 10, which is also a very common size pot, I don't need quite as many coals. The bottom line is a complete ring around the top and a complete ring around the bottom, and that's going to get me somewhere between 325 and 350 degrees. If I need to do more baking, in other words, that's more top heat, I'll put a few more coals on top. The coolest thing for me is the ring method. We cook Thanksgiving dinner in the Dutch oven. Well, what do you cook? Everything for Thanksgiving dinner. Some years we have done in Dutch ovens. We don't do it every year that way, but we'll do the turkey, we'll do the dressing, sweet potato casserole, green bean casserole. We'll do biscuits. What else do we do for Thanksgiving dinner? All of it in Dutch ovens. All of it, the temperatures are regulated the same way. I made a ring around the top, a ring around the bottom. Because the reality is, when you look at a recipe and the instructions tell you what size pan to use, typically it's going to tell you to use a 9x13 pan for something. The area of this 12-inch Dutch oven is just slightly fewer square inches than a 9x13 pan. So every recipe that you have that calls for a 9x13 pan, you can use a number 12 Dutch oven. It will be a little bit thicker than your 9x13 pan will be. And using the ring, if the recipe calls for a 9x13 pan and 350 degrees, you can do that with your Dutch oven, just as I've described.